Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Josh Vickers, and I'm with RTI International's Forensic Technology Center of Excellence, and I will be moderating today's event. Our webinar for today is entitled Advancing Research Initiatives and Combating the Human Trafficking Epidemic. We do have two presenters today. Our first presenter to introduce is Dr. Timothy Palmbach. He had joined the faculty of the University of New Haven in 2004 and is currently the chair of the Forensic Science Department. He's also the founder of the Center for Forensic Investigation of Trafficking in Persons at UNH. This center is committed to providing research, training, and investigative assistance to government agencies in the U.S. and abroad. Since 2013, Professor Palmbach has engaged with the implementation of advanced forensic investigative methods in the war against trafficking in persons and related issues such as counterterrorism. He worked in conjunction with the non-governmental organizations and government officials to employ the collection of DNA-based evidence. Throughout his 34-year career, Timothy Palmbach has used his expertise in forensic science and investigations of matters of international interest, human rights, and counterterrorism. Our next presenter to introduce, and actually our first presenter speaking today, is Dr. Claire Glynn. She formerly worked as a forensic examiner at LGC Forensics in Oxfordshire, England, which is the United Kingdom's leading forensic science provider. She also worked in the forensic biology department in the homicide and sexual assaults team, which has investigated some of UK's most high-profile crimes. She is now an assistant professor of forensic science at the University of New Haven. Dr. Glynn is very active in research where her focus is on biological evidence with the goal to enhance our understanding of the underlying molecular mechanisms which can provide probative information from biological samples. A quick disclaimer, the opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. Any products and manufacturers discussed are presented for informational purposes only and do not constitute product approval or endorsement by the U.S. Department of Justice. And now, without further ado, I'm going to switch everyone's layout to our presentation, and I would like to hand the microphone over first to Dr. Claire Glynn.
Hi everybody, thank you for joining us today. I first wanted to just start off with discussing what the actual aim of this project was, and it was to detail strategies for moving forward forensic and social science research, moving them forward so that they can then be applied to the combat against human trafficking. So we've composed 20 recommendations for this, which we'll discuss today, but the ultimate aim here is to basically turn knowledge into practice and to inform the wider community of these strategies through this webinar and ultimately the best practices guide that will be published pretty soon. I'm going to turn you guys over to Professor Palmbach now, who will start on recommendation 1.
Thank you, and really it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for joining us. Again, it's 20 recommendations is the culmination of 2 years worth of our work to look at the broad body of knowledge, and for many of you who are listening and contributed, thank you and job well done. And then to call out with a kind of a forensic focus where we think there's room for enhancement and growth, and also where there's best practices that we want to share. I'm going to handle more the biometric and policy and data analysis kinds of domains, and Dr. Glynn will handle the forensic DNA side of this project. Our first recommendation, it should be first, is that although we're going to quickly dive into the technology, we really always have to remember that we need to be victim-centric, that at the core of this problem are survivors and victims and potential future victims, and we have an ethical and moral responsibility to always hold them first and foremost, and to, as we put forward our policies and practices, always make consideration of their well-being. Obviously, when you start doing research, you find all the tangential areas, and whether they be social science, structured, or healthcare, law enforcement, judicial, policy-based, government, or non-NGO, we really are all working toward the same goal. Our goal is to look at specific forensic tools and where they could have utility, how to use them best, how not to use them, and how to further research in the area. One disclaimer, which is always true, whenever you engage in a practice like a best practice and a recommendation of research, without doubt you will miss people. So we apologize in advance. And we also encourage you to take a look at the best practice guide, which is forthcoming as a part of this project, which obviously is exceptionally more detailed than what we can convey in a matter of just a few moments. So our next recommendation, the second one, is really two prongs of the biometrics. And one is we really got to look at designing and increasing our utility for making biometrics very effective, while at the same time ensuring that data privacy collection and use are maintained. And this is a really careful balancing act, and it's one that we have to do further research in both areas. To have a system that's entirely data secure and private and meets all of our human rights standards is important, but if that's all it does, it wasn't worth building. And so we're going to try to talk to you about maintaining those rigorous standards and at the same time trying to find a way to have effective, meaningful systems. There has been a lot of work done in this area, and most of the work has been on the scope and the privacy and the data collection side, which is really where it should be. And so you can look to organizations like IOM has just done a great amount of work and good work. And then you can look for policy and protocol and projects through Interpol and Europol. Here in the U.S., Homeland Security is responsible for a lot of good work in that area. And you can look for regulations, both internally from the U.S. through the electronic biometric transmission standards and others, as well as EU and related regulations. Where we need to move, though, is to begin to now look at, since we have such a strong foundation and an appropriate one dealing with the privacy issues, is how can we better utilize our biometrics? Now, they've been recognized as a valuable means of verification and identification, as you see in the picture here, but we really do need to move past a single biometric platform, and particularly one that's so limited as to a single fingerprint entry into the system. There's great reason for the need to use multiple modality biometrics and to use them to better create our databasing and our searching capacities. Another area that's not directly biometric tool or DNA, but a really important one is the technology side, the IT technology side. There's two chunks to it. There's the classical big data analysis. We'll talk about that later. And that's really just forewarning that, we all aware of the fact we need to create bigger data sets, more comprehensive data sets, and then we all have to learn how to share our data sets and then use them appropriately and for the best value. An area that hasn't had a lot of knowledge and exposure in this area is operational research. So I want to give you just a couple ideas about it. So operational research, in the most simplistic of sense, will take a problem and it will look at it from the perspective of predictive. So it'll say, so let's look at, first bullet point. Should we invest money into an adult, quote-unquote, sex workers population, given all of our other demands in the community? And before you answer that, on kind of gut feelings or intuitions, if you ran it through an OR model, you could begin to say, well, for every dollar that we put into this, what would be the outcome of that? Would we save mental health costs? Would we save subsequent health costs? Would we have an improvement in the overall conditions of society as well as the well-being of those who've been victimized? And when you quantify that and monetize that, all of a sudden a policy decision in that direction seems to make a lot more sense. There's been a couple leaders in this area, and again, if you look at our report, you'll see many more listed, but Worcester Polytech Institute has really taken an interest in human trafficking and OR. They've had a couple really good projects to date. You see listed here is a data approach to understanding human trafficking networks. Networks are really key and foundational. We'll talk about that later, and as I begin to push you and discuss moving from reactive-based policing and policies to proactive and network analysis-based methods. And they're also working on a matching problem in refugee and immigrant settlement, something very closely related to the issue of human trafficking. Fourth recommendation, this is a good time to say job well done really to our community. It's addressing collaborative models and the fact that lately we've gotten it right where we've really taken on the approach to do collaborative interdisciplinary models and really seen how successful they are. So two things that I'd like to say about that is great job. Let's get more of those. Let's get more resources to do more of those. But secondarily, let's try to go to the next step with those. Let's look at making something that's more proactive, holistic, and will give us a sustainable long-term goal of reducing trafficking, not only in a specific jurisdiction, but beyond the walls of that specific jurisdiction. If there's ever a slide that really underrepresents all the great work, this next one is it. But it highlights, the State Department's commitment through the adding the fourth P for partnership. It correctly highlights for you the OJP and OVC joint project of the Enhanced Collaborative Model, which has been around for several years, and a super good methodology where they've done a great job of pairing local law enforcement or regional law enforcement to local social service providers, and they've gotten some really, really good results. You'll see other state, there's Connecticut, the HEART Project is a good example of what can be done at a state level. And again, there's just a wide variety of these, and certain states are further along than others. So for those who have done this well, keep going. And I would challenge you to look at what is the next way that we can go maybe in a deeper dive on a more long-term sustainable goal, create a project that will perhaps gather a little more data and help our investigative strategies move down the road. Our next one is really a follow-up to that, which is really continuing in my push and my obnoxious call for us to move away from more reactive to proactive measures. Having said that, look, I understand many of you are going to immediately ask some very relevant questions like, what's going to be the scale, and are they sustainable, and are you really making sure that you're protecting the rights of victims first, and what if we have limited budgets? Aren't those that are already in need of assistance the most important? And the answer to all that is yes, but I do believe we can look at doing things to a better outcome. They will all, though, require more data. That's the bottom line, and I think we're seeing that. We look at some of the recent advances, Polaris Project to name one, as well as other organizations where they really grasp the need to expand their data collection, the scope of their data collection, and then begun to do some data analysis and basic link analysis so that you can learn more from your data. I really think we're just on the beginning phase of this. I think that if we can all agree to gather more data, collect it properly, secure it properly, utilize it properly, and share it, we're going to be amazed what we can learn, and I think we can really have a good hope in the future for making a bigger dent in this problem. Here's just a map of some early data analysis we did over collections in Nepal, and you're looking at the Nepal-India border principally. You're looking at the location where trafficking victims were originated, where they were brought to the apex points along the Nepal-Indian border. And the value of this, it goes back to what a lot we're talking about today, is the integration of forensic DNA collection and testing methods as well as biometrics to help identify trafficking victims and help in the prosecution of cases. And it's bad enough that stuff's expensive. It's bad enough that it's complex. It's more difficult if we don't know where to best utilize it to get our best efficiency. So getting this kind of analytic data would allow us then, as you see here, by looking at the node collections, you have basically three principal areas where it would make sense to put our equipment and conduct our projects. Recommendation number 6 begins to talk about the reality of the legislation and policy that's going to need to be behind this. Now, there's been a really good amount of work done, particularly over the last 5 years, and there's some really foundational documents, whether you look at the UN Palermo Protocol or the original TVPA Act through the U.S. State Department and all the modifications over the past years. You'll also find guidelines and policies really recently under development in the EU and the African Union, as well as the Interpol and other law enforcement agencies. So they've done a great job and a very important foundation. But what I'm going to highlight for you is that as we begin to understand the value of biometrics and DNA collection and utilization, we're going to have to make modifications and authorizations through legislation and new policy, and then of course policy leads to training, and the cycle continues. So I'd like to highlight the extent of the work that's done. but caution us that it really is still at the beginning phase with everything ahead of us and things that we need to do.
So with recommendation 7 is in a way piggybacks on what Tim was just discussing, where we're going to be looking at public genealogy databases and more importantly the legislation and policy surrounding these. Now this is obviously a very hot topic at the moment. There's an absolute abundance of these recreational genealogy sites out there, and these are available to just curious members of the public. I'm sure even some of you in the audience have submitted your DNA to one of these companies. I know I have a couple of years ago. More recently, law enforcement have been utilising them to investigate cold cases with the Golden State Killer identified back in April using the third-party free website GEDmatch. Since then, there have been dozens of these cold cases solved using these types of genealogy databases. These sites, however, could also be used to trace victims of human trafficking, missing persons, identification of victims of mass disasters. The list really goes on. However, civil liberties experts really argue that this threatens the Fourth Amendment protections of millions of people. So the question really should be asked, do we have legal and ethical right to use people's genetic information in this way when really they uploaded it innocently and voluntarily, just like I did, without any consent for its use in this way? If we think about our current criminal DNA databases, such as CODIS, we know that these are highly regulated, not just for accuracy, but also for abuse. And we have statutory protections here in place to protect people's privacy and rights. But the commercial genealogy sites really are completely unregulated. There are many groups voicing their concerns about this, such as the World Privacy Forum, and there have also been a few published articles in recent months discussing and addressing this. But what we need to ensure is that when legislation and policy is put in place for this, and that's a when, not an if, that this also addresses human trafficking investigations, that the legislation and policy can include human trafficking investigations, as it really could be an invaluable tool for us. We suggest that perhaps a task force or a working group of interested parties really is formed for a variety of disciplines needed to address this issue essentially.
Okay, the next recommendation is a claim. Some of you will really get this and are on page with it. Others will really struggle with this in trying to see the nexus. But there is a need to understand that when we start looking at the plague of human trafficking on the global perspective and the millions of people that are currently enslaved and the many more at risk that if we're not careful will become enslaved, we see some common themes. And as we see these common themes, we recognize some necessary linkages and some connectivity. Now, the value of this is one of the takeaways that we're all going to have today is we all need more resources. We're all frustrated with the lack of them. We all tend to have our own priority in our camp that we're strong in. And as a result, we sometimes struggle to get either those in positions of authority or funding to pay attention to us. Well, once you begin to understand that much of this is co-linked, and forensics is a great example of we can build out a capacity within a jurisdiction with many of these tools we're going to talk about today, and with that we could have a very profound effect on addressing not only issues of human trafficking, but basic human rights, border security, immigration, a variety of transnational and organized crime, as well as counterterrorism. Now all of a sudden there seems to be an interest in both funders and governments to move forward in this direction. And now it gets complicated because we are now trying to solve a myriad of problems that will have different scope, different priorities, different needs of security of data, different sets of data. But a good starting point is understanding that in the middle of this evil thing that we're living through in human trafficking is an illicit organization. It may be large, may be small, may be structured, may be loosely structured. Often they have political ideology and goals, but at the very least they're seeking to make illicit funding. And if we look at the literature, we all know just the extent of which human trafficking provides that illicit funding. If we could solve what you see in red is the issues of conflict, poverty, rule of law, and forced migration, we don't need these tools. Give us the answer. We'll get you a Nobel Prize. I'll hang up, and we'll count this as a stupid project. The other part that I'd like to co-align with you is that one of the other areas that we get utility is we say, well, okay, you're now talking about this global movement, this global interaction, and how long is it going to take us to study this from the perspective of human traffickers? And I say, don't do that. Somebody's already studied that from other perspectives, whether it be the movement of drugs or weapons across our globe. They move them across a given route and pathway because it makes sense, and because for geopolitical reasons they can move them in that direction. So guns, drugs, people will get moved the same way. We can learn from each other and build mechanisms that work along.
So with recommendation 9, we wanted to address the need for local, regional and international training for adopting best practices really across the board. So a number of years ago, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security established this Blue campaign, which essentially focuses on combating human trafficking. It brings together law enforcement, government, non-governmental and also private organizations, basically to protect people's basic rights to freedom and also to bring those who exploit human lives to justice. But also they raise public awareness of human trafficking. They educate the public on how to recognize it and also how to report it. Additionally, they train law enforcement and others on how to investigate human trafficking cases. But this really, really needs to be done on a wider scale. In most states now in the U.S., they have their own laws criminalizing human trafficking, making it a violation not only of international and federal law, but also of state law. So there really is a need for even more training at local and regional levels, and also internationally, so that everyone is carrying out the best practices for these types of investigations. And ultimately, the training should include the forensic technologies that we're discussing here throughout this webinar, and ultimately in the best practices guide that will be published from this.
So before we move on to 10, really quick, I want to add one little side comment on the training recommendation. Shout out to Homeland Security and the Blue campaign, Fletzy and others. Great job. And you've done an amazing job getting this message out to tons of first responders. And you know what, in other paradigms, I look at the work that's been done in the healthcare sector. They've done it. HEAL's an organization up my way that does a great job of facilitating this. So there's really good training going on to get particularly those on the front lines, first responders who have the best ability to identify these trafficking victims and give them their first introduction and care. However, we need to, particularly in the law enforcement and investigative sector, think about moving the ball to the next level. Get past what we routinely call as law enforcement training 101 and begin to look at more sophisticated, long, network-based analysis and investigations. I know you're going to give me examples where it's happened, and I'm going to say it's true and I'm great that it has, but I think we both have to agree it hasn't happened to the extent it should. So back to now number 10. There is a strong need for us to do multi-faceted biometric systems, and that shouldn't be something scary where you should all the time, like go to your local airport. They've made a great use of it, and they're really using it for a variety of good purposes, principally there for watch list and security, but it can be used for a variety of other things as well. And so what we want to talk about is in the world of biometrics, what are the biometrics that we can use? There is going to be a fair amount of information in the best practice guide that's worth a read, and it'll go through things like what are the pros and cons of a particular biometric, how to best utilize a particular biometric, when to best utilize a biometric and when not to, which ones marry together, kinds of training and technology requirements for particular ones. But what you'll see in practice out in the field kind of tend to be the current big three, which is facial recognition, fingerprint identification, and iris recognition. And a lot of the government platforms are moving forward either utilizing all or two or portions of this biometric debate. As we go forward, though, just keep in mind there's other tools out there that can solve some other problems. There's some really interesting work, and I think a lot of it needs more research for sure. But we have gait analysis hardware and software, how you walk, odor analysis, looking at a big protein array distribution and trying to identify or classify individuals by that, nose geometry, hand geometry. So there's There's a lot of other biometric data that's available to us, and initial research shows us that it can be really meaningful for, at the very least, an exclusion or a basic screening measure, and then much of it moving toward the potential for final individualization or identification. So there's a lot that's out there. The biometric world is really growing, expanding, a lot of great research taking place. Those of us in the human trafficking world, please pay attention to that technology and work with the vendors and the researchers so that they can begin to focus your needs with their research.
So for recommendation 11, we wanted to address rapid DNA instrumentation, its use for identification, but also for kinship, and specifically for the illegal movement of children across borders. Now, this is a widely encountered crime observed at borders across the globe, but there are tools such as this that can be available to us that could help us identify these situations. Now, rapid DNA technology has been around for quite a number of years. It was back in 2010 that the FBI established their Rapid DNA Program Office, aiming essentially to facilitate and integrate rapid DNA technology, but for use with law enforcement. Now, anyone that's not familiar with rapid DNA technology, it's essentially a fully automated process of developing a DNA profile from a reference sample buccal or cheek cell swab that can be processed in under 90 minutes with basically no human intervention, well, a little bit of human intervention, but it's all performed within the instrument, and so a scientist isn't really needed. The aim here was to place these at booking stations with police forces and law enforcement agencies. Several instruments have been developed by various companies. These companies are working with the FBI currently, who are testing and evaluating these instruments. Over on the right-hand side of the screen on the upper right, you can see NetBio produced the DNA scan rapid DNA analysis system first for use with law enforcement agencies, but now they've subsequently produced the ANDI rapid DNA system, which is pictured. And this is really a field-forward product that was designed for military or homeland security applications. On the bottom right-hand of the screen, Intogenics have produced various versions of their rapid hit technology. I quite like the rapid hit technology because this uses rapid link software, which can be used not just for identification purposes, but this software can also perform familial and also kinship analysis, and all of this is occurring in under 90 minutes. The FBI's current plan is to implement pilot testing of rapid DNA technology in 2019. However, we believe that this pilot testing could actually have an additional setting, and it could be deployed at international borders, used in scenarios essentially where suspicions are raised as to the parentage of young children crossing borders, and essentially assist with family reunification. For recommendation 12, this is kind of a hot topic at the moment. This is addressing the use of forensic phenotyping and estimation of biogeographic origin to deal with physical evidence located from trafficking victims. Now, this is an image in Bangladesh, and the huts that you see are essentially brothels. And this location is essentially a shipping queue which brings trafficked victims and also traffickers from all corners of the world. So there are really victims and traffickers from every country located here. Now, in recent years, novel tool has come to the forefront of forensic molecular methods, and this is known as forensic phenotyping. Forensic phenotyping essentially aims to establish a person's physical appearance, such as their hair color, eye color, skin color, from their DNA, but it also crosses over into biogeographic ancestry estimation. Now, for a number of years, many researchers worldwide were conducting quality research on this method and how best to use it. However, just recently, within the last 6 months or so, a lot of these researchers actually came together and established the VISAGE Consortium, or VISAGE, I don't know how they want to pronounce it. Basically, it's an acronym for Visible Attributes Through Genomics. Now, this group is pretty impressive because they bring together interested parties from a variety of different disciplines and really aims to refine and validate the methods employed and ensure that essentially that the right methods are being used in the right way. Now, from what I can see, there are two key main players who are considered international pioneers of this area of study, which is evident in the literature, and these are Dr. Manfred Kaiser and also Dr. Susan Walsh. Now, Dr. Kaiser is from the Erasmus University Medical Center in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and also Dr. Walsh, who runs her own forensic DNA phenotyping research lab at Indiana University, Purdue in Indianapolis. Now, both of these researchers have published extensively in this area, and they've actually developed these really novel and quite cool models to accurately predict hair color, skin color, eye color, and also other physical attributes from really minute quantities of DNA, which is really quite remarkable. Now, to some people, this might sound like some science fiction, but it really isn't. It's already being used in active criminal investigations, primarily with the use of Snapshot Parabon Labs, providing this service, which is a private company. And they will provide this service for a fee, of course, to law enforcement agencies basically across the U.S. Here, essentially, the police forces provide a sample to the companies. They produce a composite profile, which you can see on the left-hand side of what a typical one would look like. And then they use this as essentially a genetic e-fit of their suspect. The middle image there is from 2015, and that was the first use of it and disseminated out to the public. Now, on the company's website, they state that they've also assisted in hundreds of investigations with several convictions obtained based upon their analysis. But if we could bring together private companies, private laboratories such as this, and also stimulate collaboration across various academic units, this field of forensic phenotyping really is becoming one of the most valuable tools to have in our forensic investigations. However, it could also find utility in human trafficking investigations. For example, let's say victims are suspected of being held in a particular location, such as a brothel. Samples of body fluids left behind could be analyzed. These could be used to produce composite profiles of these individuals and also assess their biogeographical origin, basically aiming to identify these victims. This would really provide some excellent investigative leads for the human trafficking investigation teams. Now, for recommendation 13, we wanted to address something that's quite novel, which is DNA methylation for age determination to help identify victims of forced child labor. Now, child labor is one of those crimes that people like us here in the Western developed world rarely think about, but the reality is that we all probably own or are currently even wearing some items of clothing that might have been manufactured by a child in slave labor, with a huge majority of this occurring in places like India and China, the products being manufactured there. Now, while there are investigation teams cracking down on this type of crime and exposing companies using child laborers, we thought let's get science involved and let's tackle it from a forensic standpoint using our own forensic molecular methodologies. Now, it's logical to assume that in the manufacturing process, your skin cells or touch DNA is left behind as a person touches the item. These skin cells can be left in areas which are ultimately protected from being lost or destroyed, such as on the inside sewn seams of articles of clothing, or inside objects like Christmas tree decorations or toys, which have been handled during the manufacturing process, but then ultimately closed shut for it to be sold. If we can collect these skin cells deposited by that person that manufactures the item and then extract out that DNA, analyze it to see if we could predict the person's chronological age, this would be of great use to us. Now, pioneering research in this area looks at the DNA methylation pattern, which we know to change over a person's lifetime. And we can look at certain sites along the DNA that can be very informative as age-associated markers. The recent research conducted at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver at the Centre of Molecular Medicine and Therapeutics, those guys there analyzed 2,000 cheek cell swabs and found that age could be estimated using 94 methylated CpG sites with a median error of about a half a year. That's absolutely phenomenal information to obtain. Now, this groundbreaking research, and us here at the University of New Haven, we've been furthering it in collaboration with UBC, but we want to assess this method with touch DNA skin cells. So we want to be able to do it with minute quantities of DNA, as this is really the type of sample that we would encounter in forced child labour investigations. Ultimately, this would be great because it would help us expose companies that exploit child labourers. It would help with conviction of those involved in trafficking of these children, and ultimately as well really raise awareness of this terrible crime and hopefully bring it to an end. Now, our 14th recommendation discusses the collection of touch DNA, so it really goes hand in hand with the recommendation that I just discussed. So if we want to be able to estimate someone's age from skin cells left behind on objects from their touch DNA, we need to make sure that we're using the best collection method to collect those skin cells for analysis. Forced labour can cross many generations, and victims are often born into slavery as a death of their parents. In this image here, we have 3 generations, the grandmother in the background, and the mother and then child in the foreground of this image. However, these products that are being manufactured by forced labour are a variety of different types of products, ranging from articles of clothing all the way to bricks, as you might see in this image. And the International Labour Organization actually provides a very extensive list of known products to be manufactured under forced labour. So you should check out their website and really increase your knowledge of what products are being manufactured. But to collect the touch DNA from these, there really isn't one ideal method of collection for touch DNA skin cells from such a wide variety of different surface types. In forensic science applications, we use a variety of methods across a variety of different labs, from the standard wet-dry double swab method up on the upper left-hand side to the mini-taping method in the middle, which is essentially a small adhesive tape used to pick up the skin cells. But there are some other newer methods that are worth investigating, such as these gel films on the upper right, and also the MVAC system, which is essentially an extremely high-powered wet vacuum that just sucks up the DNA from a surface. Now, this type of research is currently ongoing here at the University of New Haven and at also other universities across the world to assess these methods and basically their application to a wide range of surface types. Our ultimate goal here is to establish best practices for the recovery of skin cells from items suspected to have been manufactured by forced labour.
Recommendation 15 picks up from there. So what are we going to do, not if, but when we really refine these protocols of methylation and are ready to go in the touch domain of finding these child laborers? We'll utilize big data analysis, or we'll need big data analysis to jump in and help us identify product distribution, product development, and product supply chain. And as we do that, and when we can demonstrate with unbiased, verifiable scientific information that a particular product line or a company that deals in a product line has got documented child labor part of it, then we can rely on the good nature and goodwill and power of some of our local government partners. And in some capacity, maybe it's just going to be the advertising goodwill of America and the like to put pressure on them and to respond accordingly. So it's a good collaborative effort that we're going to do between a scientific endeavor now coming alongside big data analysis. There's multiple aspects of trafficking, and often we focus too much so on sexual exploitation. I'm not meaning it shouldn't get the focus, but labor trafficking, organ transplant trafficking. We didn't talk a lot about it today, but we've addressed it somewhat in the guide, so please look at it. But there are some groups already who've done a lot of work and have a good understanding of the international child labor issue. IOL being one, and Lustrada, a very, very structured and robust organization within Europe.
With recommendation 16, we wanted to look at implementing forensic science-based practices in the investigation of human trafficking survivors that have been involved in sexual exploitation. So in the forensic science industry, we have some very well-established procedures and protocols that we currently use in sexual assault investigations that are submitted into the crime lab. These methods include a range of different methods at our disposal for both the screening and also the confirmation of typically forensically relevant body fluids such as blood, semen, saliva. We also have sexual assault evidence collection kits that are extremely comprehensive and really help with guiding the examiners to ensure that all possible evidence is collected. Now, human trafficking victims who have been sexually exploited, typically multiple times over long periods of time, these victims really do deserve their exploitation to be investigated with the same level of detail, of technical accuracy, with the same methods that we currently employ in the sexual assault investigations submitted to the labs. So we're currently working on enhancing the methods we already have, and we're also hoping to eventually transition to some emerging novel methods for body fluid identification. Now, some of these emerging methods include microRNA profiling, DNA methylation analysis, and some spectroscopic methods such as Raman spectroscopy or indeed ATR, FTIR spectroscopy. Now, there's a number of organizations across the globe investigating these methods. Some of them I've listed down at the bottom of the slide, such as Virginia Commonwealth, University of Florida International, the University of Bonn in Germany, and the University of Albany. Now, all of these researchers are really performing some top quality research with these methods and are truly publishing extensively on the utility of these. What I'd really like to see is more of a collaborative approach whereby we could join forces and truly assess and validate these methods, develop some best practices for them, and ultimately have them implemented into not just forensic laboratories and forensic investigations, but also into human trafficking investigations, and particularly those that involve sexual exploitation. Now, rapid DNA, recommendation 17 deals with also, again, some rapid DNA technologies, but not for the methods that we discussed earlier in recommendation 11. Here we want to see rapid DNA technologies implemented into sexual assault investigations and human trafficking victims that have been exploited in sexual assault scenarios. As I stated earlier, current rapid DNA technologies can only be used with reference sample buccal cell cheek swabs. And that's because there's an abundance of DNA in them and they're pretty clean. But now we'd like to see rapid DNA technologies to be expanded to be able to use crime scene samples. For example, semen stains, saliva stains, some stains in low quantities, stains that aren't so fresh, or basically stains that aren't in an ideal condition. Now, the Nobel Prize winner for this would be a rapid DNA technology that could do all of that, and of course still in just 90 minutes, but it would also decipher mixed DNA profiles from that of 2 or more contributors. Do I think that's likely in the very near future? No. Can we remain optimistic and be a bit of a dreamer? Yes, let's try with it. This type of system that could use the crime scene samples such as semen stains and saliva stains really could be useful in scenarios such as, let's say an American tourist may travel to somewhere like Bangkok in Thailand. That tourist may engage in a sexual act with a minor or indeed a child. These pedophile tourists, as they're known, often quickly return to their home countries after these heinous acts have been carried out, basically in order to evade the authorities and to essentially escape conviction. But if we were able to have some rapid DNA technology in place whereby we could ID the individual from body fluids left behind on the victim or at the scene and basically identify them before they even get to the airport, then they could be extradited back to the US. They could be tried and convicted here in the US as if the crime occurred here, and basically ensure that they do indeed serve time for their crime and that ultimately justice is served. With recommendation 18, here we want to address mixture DNA analysis. Now, anyone that is a forensic scientist knows the difficulty of dealing with a complex mixture of mixed DNA profile, particularly those of 3 or more contributors. In scenarios where a trafficking survivor has been repeatedly assaulted by numerous individuals, it can be quite difficult to separate out and identify the individual contributors of the body fluids and the DNA samples that are left behind either on the victim or at the scene. Now, the view of the presentation has just gone from our screen, so perhaps it's just reloading. It says the connection is lost.
You can keep going. We can see everything.
Okay, great. It's back up on my screen now. So for several years, there's been various organizations and agencies that have been trying to address this challenge with mixture data. And they're trying to essentially provide best practices for the interpretation and ultimately the reporting of mixture DNA profiles. Organizations such as NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and the European Forensic Genetics Network of Excellence are very active in assessing methods and various software systems such as StarMix and TrueAllele for mixture interpretation and establishing best practices for their use. Now, evidence recovered from human trafficking investigations involving mixed DNA samples, they truly do need to be treated with the same care and caution as we do in forensic investigations, and ultimately the investigators need to be trained to the same level and standard as those that we have working now in accredited crime laboratories across the country.
Recommendation 19, we're back to the use now, not necessarily big data analysis, but developing tools principally to combat online sexual exploitation. And there's been two leading companies that really done a lot of work, Thorn and their productware, and the Carnegie Mellon Group and Traffic Jam. Essentially, they've provided tools for law enforcement to scrape the internet, look at some of the large internet providers who allow for the sexual exploitative services to be displayed, and then provide investigative leads for law enforcement. They've been really, really effective. A job well done. Interesting side note, in April 2018, this past year, some really good, long-needed federal legislation made it through the CESTA and FOSTA bills. What this really did was dealt with a loophole in the past legislation and the CDA Act, which shielded internet providers from liability and suit and even criminal prosecution for engaging in facilitation of illegal activities, much like we're seeing in trafficking of children. What happened, and what I would encourage is that as legislation moves forward, always be aware of the short and long-term implications on existing analytical tools, and try to work in conjunction with the developers and researchers. There's a quick slide here you can see on the study in Connecticut relating to Backpage, and the only thing I want to highlight on that is there is a lot more money at play here than people would think, and as a result of that, do not think that if you have what you believe to be a local community problem only, particularly with online exploitation, that it's not something that traffickers and other organized groups aren't going to pay attention to, because the amount of money that can be made is simply staggering. Our final recommendation, number 20, deals with the use of DNA methods in DVI, or victim identification. Unfortunately, there is all too often the case where those who are at risk and could have been trafficking victims, or even those who are trafficking victims, become killed. I don't know how else we can say this. And to some extent, we see even in today's culture things that harbor on the verge of a genocide, if not an actual genocide. And therefore, we need tools to address these. And there is some really good research out there taking place, whether it be down at UNT, who's taking the lead in missing person identification, and their strong work with bone and degraded samples.
So basically, to conclude, really what we see is that the advancement in a lot of these forensic molecular methodologies in particular has revolutionized our forensic science industry throughout the last 30 years. But these advancements are continuing on a week-by-week basis. We're seeing such amazing improvement and things that we never thought were possible before. However, they don't just have to apply to criminal forensic everyday investigations. They can also address other important challenges such as this with the human trafficking epidemic. And we really hope to be able to transition some of these emerging technologies to address this problem. Ultimately, as well, we see it as that we all have one shared goal, and that really is to carry out truly impactful research then transfer this knowledge and ultimately develop and provide a best practice guidance for addressing this epidemic.
Joshua, back to you, and we're more than willing to take any questions.
All right, we do have quite a few questions that have come in. Before I start reading those, I just want to make sure our audience sees there in the middle of your screen, we do have both Dr. Palmbach and Dr. Glenn's contact information there, so be sure you do take that down before we leave today. So the first question that came in is asking, who do you think should be the holder of an international database to allow sharing between all agencies and countries?
So, great question, loaded question, and it'll sound like I'm dodging it. I'm not. I'm less concerned with the who as the how and the rules. It's going to, look, it's going to get buy-in where countries in different jurisdictions are going to be willing to participate. They're going to want some flesh in the game. There's going to have to be some kind of multiple country authorization, structure, policing, whatever you want to, however you want to do it. One thing we didn't address in great detail because of our time, but you'll see more so in the best practice guide, is a really good understanding that you're going to need multiple different databases for different purposes that allow for different accesses. And so as you look at something like an international scope database, which, yes, I do believe we need, you're going to need to create very specific policy and segregation and different data sets and different exposure rates and great deals of protection. My hesitation for picking any country and saying that's the country who should host it is I don't think any country over the history of time is guaranteed to never fall asunder and be problematic. And if we historically look back to the 40s and thought of the horrors of a database like this getting into the wrong hands, how bad it could have been, that shouldn't scare us from doing it, but it should really forewarn us to do it with great caution and guidance and structure.
All right. Next question we have is pretty specific. Not sure how much you'll be able to dive into it, but Tammy was asking, how is Tennessee looking regarding the P for partnership? I'm not sure if that was something that could be answered.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think, I'd ask them, what are they working with OJC, OVC, the Department of Justice, and a lot of their collaborative projects, OJDDP, the Juvenile Justice Division, really good federal resources that I think would be willing to come alongside any state and be hopefully a partner with them. So I think the best I can do on that.
All right. Next question from Grace. She's asking, I'm looking for information regarding human trafficking involving juveniles. What are some of your recommendations where she can begin looking?
Again, I think Office of Juvenile Justice is going to be a good start. Department of Health and Human Services in D.C. is doing a lot of work in these areas. I think once you're in the juvenile domain, you can look at your local statewide organizations. I know here in Connecticut, our DCF division has got a human trafficking multidisciplinary team approach group and are a really great resource. So I'd look to see if you have it within your own country, your own jurisdiction, state, and if not, look to models. Connecticut, Florida, countless other states are doing some great work, and I'm sure they'd be willing to work with you.
All right. Next two questions we have came in from Athena regarding rapid DNA. In rapid DNA testing, how many samples per test does it work with? And also, does rapid DNA work based on DNA or mRNA?
So I can answer that question for you. There's been quite an evolution of the rapid DNA systems or technologies that have been developed, and there are multiple vendors or manufacturers of these, so it really depends upon which one you're looking at. It evolved from one to begin with, and now it's able to work with 5. But again, it depends on the system or the vendor the supplier of the instrument that you're working with. Ultimately, it would be great if we could ramp that up to be able to have more high throughput from a single run, because these cartridges and the processing of these aren't typically expensive, but we are seeing a reduction in the cost as time goes by and the methods improve. The question regarding, I think it was, does it run on DNA or messenger RNA? It's based upon DNA, so it's extracting out within inside the system the DNA content from the sample and amplifying that up using the global filer and some of the FDM, FDR loci that are commonly used in crime laboratories. Well, we have, I can't see it.
Okay. Next question we have came in from Kayla. She's asking, is the goal for rapid DNA testing to be expanded to state and local law enforcement use as well?
Yeah, from what we can see from the FBI's initiative, that is the plan for it to be expanded, but it's only going to, 2019 is just around the corner. So pilot testing is to begin in 2019 from what the FBI have told us, but I don't know when in 2019. It will start off at, I believe, major law enforcement agencies, but it will ultimately filter down throughout the years, I believe, to local and state.
Okay, before we go to our next question, just a quick reminder that we do have a PDF version of today's slide deck that will be available for download directly after our Q&A session. So the next question came in from Jim Love. He's asking, are there biometrics available for bacterial, fungal, and viral antigens that increase disease pandemics like the Great Flu, typhoid, etc., that may be a result of human trafficking?
It's a great question, Jim. I currently don't have an answer for you on that. It's certainly something, though, worth exploring, and it could be something that should be investigated, really, and some research performed on it.
Okay, next question is asking, how does the science deal with people with mosaic DNA or human chimeras?
The science of what, though? Which area are we talking about here? Are we talking about the DNA methylation for age estimation? Are we talking about rapid DNA? Or are we talking about, recovery of victims' remains and dealing with degraded DNA samples, or indeed even mixture profiles? It's a great question, and it's an interesting question. The encountering of mosaic DNA in human chimeras really isn't as frequent as some people might believe, particularly in the forensic investigation world. But it's something worth exploring, and so definitely something worth investigating some time into looking at.
Okay, she was mentioning specifically the phenotype.
Oh, the phenotyping. Yeah, it's not an area that I'm aware that has been investigated yet for the forensic phenotyping. Perhaps we could get Dr. Kaiser or Dr. Walsh to address something like that in the future, because they're doing some quality research in that area.
Okay, next question that came in, how will these methods reduce the current backlog of cases that have DNA gathered but are not yet analyzed? His reference is in Houston, the backlog is currently measured in years.
Okay, so you didn't get my CV and see that my prior life was as a forensic lab director, so I truly, truly feel your pain. And I will now advocate publicly for Houston, give them more resources, they need them. And then I can say that for most of the other agencies. Yeah, I got your problem. My concern is this. Would it be an increase? Of course. Anytime we have an increase of work, then you have a prioritization, and you've got to worry about ongoing criminal cases and prosecutions, and you're constantly up against it. My concern is that we don't have a long-term vision that should be structured on finding the resources rather than in the midst of an overwhelming current problem, yet just diminishing these realities down. I've seen too often people make statements, often public, that human trafficking is awful and they'll do anything to address it. And yet then as I watch them, particularly if they're in a position of power or authorization over the years to come, I don't see them allocating or pushing, legislating for those funding. So we all got to kind of join together here and use operational data resource if we can, and need be, to demonstrate the utility and the wisdom, although I think the social justification alone should be enough.
All right, next question we have came in from Claudio asking implementation, budgeting, validations under ISO. These are just some of the issues for START. How do you think the poorer countries will react to any of these solutions?
So a couple quick comments here. One, it's maybe another good reason why rapid DNA is a good tool. It is by no means going to solve all their forensic DNA issues, not by a long shot. But for some of these pressing problems in counterterrorism and border security, it could work, and it will work. It is also something that will take a relatively small amount of time, training, and development to get up and running. One of the things I think we're all too painfully aware of is that we create non-sustainable solutions, and I've seen that overseas a lot. You'll be in a very poor environment, and you'll see that through a funding source, they've gotten millions of dollars to implement a very high level of technology and instrumentation, only to see it broken down, to see their consumable budgets dwindle, to see insufficient technical staffing, and now we have really expensive paperweight. So I think we need to be aware of building long-term sustainable solutions that make sense given both the needs and the capacities of the country we're in.
All right. The last question we currently have is asking, there are an extensive amount of databases available for missing persons worldwide, which obviously have their pros and cons. However, federal databases are still underused, especially by medical examiners and coroners, who are the ones that deal with the unidentified remains. What should we do to improve the usage of these databases in order to improve the probability of matching the missing with unidentified remains that arrive at medical legal facilities?
All right, great question. Again, it's kind of loaded there. So first part, that there are lots of worldwide databases. One of the things that's a reality is that they're not necessarily compatible, that they, even if we wanted them to talk well together, they don't. Then if they can talk well together, then we have to come up with MOUs and legal exchange policies about data sharing. Some of that has been done, and there's going to be more need for further area there. But look, we do need to link these data sets together. Regarding what can we do to get people more engaged in it, some of it is just awareness. I think we got to get back out to the law enforcement community that there's tools, and there are people who are doing some really amazingly good work in the identification arena. Other things that I think that are a little more provocative is to look at, well, what else can we marry with you? Can we look at some of the phenotyping and familiar testing and genealogy-based testing that Dr. Glenn shared to use it in conjunction and support of some of your missing person cases and unidentified remains? So I think we can think a little bit outside of the box, look at maybe implementing some of these new tools to get better results. And then I don't think in this particular arena, we just need some more public awareness and education.
All right, thank you so much. That was our last question of the day. We are a few minutes over, so we're going to go ahead and move into our closing. Obviously, the first thing I would like to do is to thank our two presenters today, Dr. Timothy Palmbach and Dr. Claire Glenn. Thank you so much for your research and your time today. We definitely appreciate that.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to have such a great audience.
Our pleasure.
All right. Obviously, again, we would like to thank our subject matter experts as well as our audience for joining us today. These webinars are just not possible without your attendance and your support. So thank you very much for joining us. You will see in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen is our file share pod, and there you will find a PDF version of today's slide deck. Simply click on the title of the file and then click the Download Files button directly below that, and you will be able to download the slides before you leave today. We do also have our customer satisfaction survey there in the middle of your screen. Simply click the word Here, and that will open up a new window for you, and you'll be able to run through our customer survey and give us valuable feedback, not only on today's webinar, but also the way that we deliver the content out to you. You will see there in your chat pod as well, Julian is starting to plug some of our social media outlets, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, as well as our podcast, which is currently in its 5th season, and our website where you will be able to find all of our current at no cost webinar offerings, as well as our podcasts and anything else that we're putting out to you, our forensic community. We are recording this and we will be converting it into our archival version, so be on the lookout for that to come out as well. That way you can reference back to, or you can provide to a colleague that might have missed it today. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar, and we look forward to you coming